1950s America. See what life was really like in historic photos. A booming decade. After decades of financial difficulty and devastating warfare, the 1950s ushered in a more positive era of peace and prosperity for the majority of Americans. Life in suburbia, with its cookie-cutter family homes and white picket fences, became the dream, while a growing economy meant the return of big spending. However, as the United States grew on the world stage, discord began to brew in its backyard, with the civil rights and anti-communist movements laying open the nation's fractures for everyone to see. 1950, the babies keep booming. Galvanized by the end of the Second World War and filled with fresh hope for the future, many Americans figured the late 1940s and 50s were the perfect time to start raising a family. Economically, things were on the up. The country's GDP, gross domestic product, grew by 150% from 1945 to 1960. Prompting the golden age of American capitalism. This all contributed to a so-called baby boom. With around 4 million births registered each year throughout the 1950s, the census of 1950 recorded, for the first time in history, a U.S. population of more than 150 million people. 1950, the American dream becomes reality. This reaffirmed sense of optimism, prosperity, and patriotism helped shape the American dream, defined by the values of opportunity and freedom for all. It promised that a life of personal, professional, and material success was attainable for the average American. During this decade, unemployment and inflation rates were low and wages high, leading to a surge in the middle class and a mass exodus of wealthy young couples to suburbia. Societal norms largely reinforced traditional gender roles of the breadwinning husband and the domestic goddess, though a large proportion of American women chose to remain and work after marriage and motherhood. 1950, America enters the Korean War. But things in 1950s America were far from rosy, and the first blip of the decade came on June 27, 1950. When President Harry S. Truman announced U.S. entry into the Korean War, what began as a civil conflict between North and South Korea quickly escalated into a proxy battle of democracy versus communism. With North Korea backed by the Soviet Union and South Korea supported by America, it was the first major event of the Cold War. Truman declared a national emergency on December 16, 1950, citing the threat of communist imperialism to the country. 1951, the Red Scare heightens. As America's anti-communist crusade intensified, it became known as the Red Scare. Fraught with hysteria and paranoia, it was a time when Soviet spies were believed to have infiltrated U.S. institutions. Espionage trials against scientists and federal employees were carried out, with Julius and Ethel Rosenberg found guilty pictured on March 6, 1951 of selling atomic secrets to the USSR. 2 years later, they became the first American civilians to be executed for conspiracy to commit espionage, which was also the first time the sentence had been exacted during peacetime. It's now thought Ethel may have been innocent. 1952, the U.S. tests the first hydrogen bomb. Though it didn't take place on American soil, the detonation of the world's first thermonuclear weapon was one of the most notorious moments for the U.S. in the 1950s. After the Soviets successfully tested an atomic device in September 1949, America grew eager to surpass them in the nuclear arms race. Approximately 1,000 times more powerful than other nuclear weapons at the time, America's first hydrogen bomb exploded above the Pacific atoll of Aniutok in the Marshall Islands on November 1, 1952. 1953, Eisenhower is inaugurated. Moderate Republican and Second World War hero Dwight D. Eisenhower became America's 34th president in 1953. This photo shows him riding to his inauguration in Washington, D.C. on January 20, won a second term in 1956. Seeing America through the rest of the decade, and into the next. Revered and respected across the nation, Ike famously signed an armistice ending the Korean War. Introduced the world-beating interstate highway system, increased the minimum wage by a third, and propelled the country towards unprecedented economic wealth. Eisenhower. 1953, Christine Jorgensen wins Woman of the Year. Christine Jorgensen, a former G in the U.S. Army, was an international celebrity in the early 1950s when she became the first American to undergo successful gender reassignment surgery. A transgender woman, Christine announced her transition to a mostly warm reception in 1952 and was featured on the cover of New York Daily News. Having had the majority of her operations in Denmark, she received the Woman of the Year award from the Scandinavian Societies of Greater New York in March 1953. A moment captured here. 1954, Marilyn Monroe marries Joe DiMaggio. It was a courtship that captivated the world, the baseball legend, and the Hollywood blonde. But when Marilyn Monroe and Joe DiMaggio tied the knot on January 14, 1954 at San Francisco City Hall pictured, it would only be for 274 days. While on their honeymoon in Japan, Marilyn was asked to entertain U.S. troops in neighboring Korea, igniting a jealousy in her husband that corroded their short, tumultuous marriage. The couple divorced in October the same year, with Marilyn accusing DiMaggio of mental cruelty. 1954, the polio vaccine is rolled out. Polio was a highly contagious and feared disease in the first half of the 20th century, causing muscle deterioration, paralysis as in former U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt's experience, and even death in the extreme. It attacked the nervous system and infected hundreds of thousands of children a year at its peak. But on February 23, 1954, a new vaccine developed by Dr. Jonas Salk was administered to elementary school pupils for the first time in Pittsburgh. As more and more children were immunized, by the year 2000 polio cases had fallen by 99%. 1954 Date Night at the Drive-In. The likes of Marilyn Monroe, Marlon Brando, Grace Kelly and John Wayne were some of the decade's biggest film stars. And as the levels of car ownership soared among young people throughout the 1950s, the preferred way for audiences to enjoy their movies was at a drive-in theater. With their pocketfuls of disposable income, teen baby boomers loved the freedom afforded to them by a set of four wheels. But having a car also offered a rare opportunity for privacy away from overbearing parents, so this generation wasn't quite as well behaved as you might think. 1954, the rise and fall of McCarthyism. One of the most inflammatory voices of America's 1950s anti-communist offensive was Joseph McCarthy, the senator for Wisconsin. He capitalized on the Red Scare by using intimidation and unsubstantiated allegations to advance himself up the political ladder, accusing the CIA, the military, State Department employees, celebrities, members of the LGBTQ community, and his critics of communist affiliations. His televised investigations in 1954 pictured, though they never formally exposed anyone, cost many their reputations and livelihoods. McCarthy was eventually censured for his conduct that December. 1955, TV dinners feed the nation. The 50s were the golden age of many things, and television was one of them. The post-war resumption of consumerism meant TVs were suddenly an affordable luxury for the average American. The first color televisions went on sale in December 1953, and by 1955, more than 64% of U.S. households owned one. It was around this time that the Swanson Company also started commercializing the TV dinner, full meals sold in oven-proof, disposable trays that could be conveniently heated up in 25 minutes. But not everyone was a fan, apparently. Some men wrote strongly worded letters to Swanson, lamenting the loss of home-cooked suppers. 1955, microwave ovens go on sale. But the convenience meal was soon to become even more sophisticated, with the advent of the microwave oven. Born from technology used in the Second World War to help boost British radar systems looking out for the Luftwaffe, the first home microwave oven was produced by the Tappan Stove Company in 1955. In this photo, Ohio Mom Joy Mies tests the new cooking unit by heating up a jar of baby food. Though there's hardly a home without one now, sales for the then expensive appliance, around $15,151 in today's money, were initially slow. 1955, sock hops and soda shops are all the rage. When 1950s teenagers weren't busy canoodling at the drive-in, they were hanging out at the local soda shop. Also known as malt shops or soda fountains, these classic fixtures of America served fizzy drinks, milkshakes, ice cream sodas, sundaes and snacks, and were incredibly popular with the preppies and greasers of the mid-century. After hours huddled around the chrome counter or squeezed into leather booths, they would then head to a sock-hop social dances typically held in school gymnasiums, where attendees had to dance in their socks to protect the wooden floors. 1955, McDonald's restaurant franchise is born. The year 1955 was huge for consumers, as the latest technology and entertainment offerings kept coming thick and fast. But nothing was faster than the service at McDonald's, which opened its first franchise in Des Plaines, Illinois, pictured on April 15 that year. Founded by Ray Kroc and spawned from an existing restaurant concept operated by brothers Richard and Morris McDonald, the fast food behemoth's biggest seller was its 15 hamburger. On its first day of operations, the Des Plaines outpost sold $366.12 for $1,283 today worth of burgers, fries and shakes. 1955, Disneyland Park opens. By the middle of the 20th century, Walt Disney had been a household name for over a decade. Encouraged by the success of his early feature-length cartoons, such as Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, Dumbo and Bambi, the artist and entrepreneur began designing an amusement park which would allow starry-eyed children and their parents to wander through his imagination. Built on 160 acres of former orange groves and costing $17 million, around $198.9 million today, the very first Disneyland park opened on July 17, 1955 in Anaheim, California. Here, Walt Disney prepares to deliver his opening day speech. 1955, the public prepares for nuclear warfare. As Cold War tensions escalated, so did the looming threat of nuclear warfare. Eisenhower's administration scrambled to devise a civil defense strategy, with duck and cover safety drills becoming common practice. But due to patriotic propaganda, and given the capabilities of atomic bombs were still being understood, the likelihood of surviving such an attack in 1950s America was vastly overestimated. Garden City-based company Walter Kidd Nuclear Laboratories started manufacturing fallout shelters. This 1955 image shows a Long Island family sitting in one stocked with tinned food and water. 1955, James Dean rides for the last time. At the time of his tragic death on September 30, 1955, 24-year-old actor and avid racer James Dean had only filmed 3 movies, 2 of which were yet to be released. Nonetheless, he was already becoming something of a pop culture icon, representative of the rebellious, slick-haired youths that started to make an appearance in the 50s. This haunting image of Dean was taken mere hours before he was killed, after his Porsche 550 Spider crashed into another vehicle at an intersection in Colami, California. His passenger and the other driver survived, while the car was believed to be cursed. 1955, the civil rights movement begins. The era's prosperity, though widespread, was not universally enjoyed. Black Americans, still constrained by racist Jim Crow laws, were denied the same financial, educational, and civil rights as white people. In 1954, segregation in public schools was declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court, which slowly unraveled other systems of oppression and threw an unavoidable spotlight on racial discrimination. But in 1955, 2 events occurred that changed America forever: the lynching of 14-year-old Emmett Till in August, and the refusal of Rosa Parks to cede her seat on a bus to a white man in December. Parks was subsequently arrested. Pictured. 1956. The Montgomery bus boycott continues. These incidents ignited the civil rights movement and brought the struggle for racial equality to the mainstream. Rosa Parks' landmark act of resistance played out in Montgomery, Alabama, where white and black bus passengers were kept in strictly separated areas. Her prosecution spurred other African Americans in the city, led by Martin Luther King Jr., to take action against such injustice. They organized a crushing boycott of the Montgomery bus transit system, which relied mostly on the custom of black travelers. It lasted 13 months, ending triumphantly in December 1956 when the city's segregated bus seating was ruled unlawful by the Supreme Court. 1956, Elvis shakes onto the scene. The mid-1950s gave rise to a new genre of music, a fusion of country, rhythm and blues, and gospel with its roots in the American South. Known as rock and roll, it appealed almost exclusively to young people, and in 1956, breakout star Elvis Presley emerged as its king. Artists like Chuck Berry, Sam Cooke, and Buddy Holly also brought rock and roll into homes across the country and the world. Here, Elvis and his untamable pelvis drive the crowds wild at the 1956 Mississippi-Alabama Fair and Dairy Show in Tupelo. Thanks for watching.